What's up, everyone in internet land? This is your girl, Rashida Hobbs Jones. I am your host as well as founder of Black Women in Educational Leadership. Welcome to today's show. Thank you all so much for tuning in. There is a different way that I'm wanting to start the show today, especially when with this week's and the last, I guess, couple of weeks recent events. I want to share with you all, the viewers and the listeners, the major mass shootings in the last 10 years. And if you're needing a quick definition of what constitutes as a mass shooting, in which I like to call a terrorist or domestic terrorist attack, it is the murder or killing of four people or more. So let's start with this. We have Aurora, Colorado. 12 people were killed in 2012 at a cinema. We have Sandy Hook Elementary. 26 people were murdered. 20 children of those 26 people were murdered back in 2012. We have Washington, D.C. at the Washington Navy Yard, where 12 people were killed in 2013. We have 2015, Charleston, South Carolina. 9 people murdered at a church. 2016, we have Orlando, Florida. 49 people were dead at the Pulse nightclub. Parkland High School, 2018, 17 people dead. Santa Fe, another school in Santa Fe, Texas, 9 people dead. The Walmart store in 2019, 22 people were killed in El Paso, Texas. We have ATL, 8 people dead. This was the attack on Asians at the nail salons and day spas in, again, ATL, Georgia in 2021. In 2021, Boulder, Colorado, another supermarket, 10 people dead. November 2021, in Oxford, Michigan, again at another school, 4 students dead. April 2022, in New York, 23 people were wounded from an actual smoke bomb that was activated. May 2022, Buffalo, New York, at another supermarket, 10 people dead. The motive because they were Black. Recently, Uvalde, Texas, 21 people killed, again at another school. Just reading the list of places where people have been targeted, murdered, wounded, injured, permanently scarred, emotionally, mentally tormented by these events, it's exhausting. And I will never get used to, ever, ever, ever get used to these attacks on bodies, on people, on human beings. I will never, ever get used to it. The numbers that I listed of those people who have died, who have been sacrificed, that does not include those who have been injured. And again, that's the 10 deadliest domestic terrorist attacks here in the United States. I just want to give a moment of silence to honor the victims and the victims' families that have been involved in these shootings and impacted by these acts of terror. Today's show is around, as I'm thinking about it now, I didn't even title the show. That's how I am responding to these events that are happening in real time. I didn't even title the show. I don't even know what the hell to call it. And some of you might be asking, what does this have to do with Black women in educational leadership? I'm going to tell you what it has to do with it. I always, always, always name that racism is so impactful and such a disease that it finds its ugly hands in various situations, structures, and systems and contexts that ultimately impacts us all. So when we continue the racism, the structural racism, inherent racism that some people have, internalized and institutional racism that this country continues to exhibit and does not want to acknowledge in the sense of making true change, it is going to impact us in a variety of situations. It is knocking at your very door. When we allow Black women to be mistreated, Black people to be mistreated, Black women to not evolve or climb up the ladder in their workplaces, which is a form of discrimination and oppression, we are giving permission for racism to breed itself in other areas. And frankly, as a Black woman and as an educator and as a human being who's an advocate for life, a true advocate, it is my duty and my responsibility to speak right now for so many of the people who are not able to speak, don't know what to say, in sorrow. Because you best believe there were educators that were terrified and scared to go to school today. There were parents who did not send their children to school. You best believe that you have parents like me who thought about their children, their daughters, their sons potentially being murdered today by a domestic terrorist who just feels like, oh, hell, I'm going to go kill up some people. You best believe people who look like me were thinking about when they walked into the grocery stores, the malls today, just taking a walk in the park or outside. Hopefully, I don't end up dead because someone hates me simply because I'm black or a person in the BIPOC category. Educators are tired. We are tired in this nation of constantly having to revisit these acts of terrorism almost on a daily basis. So it's my duty to bring this up as an educator, as an African American, and as a Black woman. We cannot continue to have educators, BIPOC community, marginalized groups brace themselves waiting for, when is it my turn? When does my day come? Over something that's preventable. This is outrageous. We are the only country in this entire world who has this problem on this level. It is inexcusable. And I'm going to use my voice, I'm going to use my platform to speak against it, to advocate, to use as part of my activism. I'm not going to remain quiet. Being silent is complicit. And those of you that know me by now know that I'm far from being quiet. On that list, 4 of those domestic terrorist acts were from Texas. On the list of the top 10 quote unquote mass shootings, Texas scored the highest. Now, many of you know I'm in Texas. Our governor is Governor Greg Abbott. We're the highest. Following us would be California and then Florida. So I don't know what I'm going to call today's show. I'll think about it when I'm done recording it and post it on there. But all I know is something has to happen. Something needs to change. And what I want to talk today about is how these quote unquote mass shootings, and I'm saying quote unquote, is so connected to white supremacy. It's so connected to racism. And I'm going to deconstruct and break down how for you. I'm going to educate you and give you the history that those of you need, because it's not just about capitalism, money. It's not just about politics. This is about power and control. In this year alone, family, we have had over 213 mass shootings. 213. Some reports even say 233, some are 240. It's all over. There has been a rise in gun violence Just this year alone. And of those 213 or however many mass shootings we have had just this year, 27 of those have been school shootings. Many of them have been out of the spirit of hate. And again, for me, this is tied to white supremacy. And as long as we don't speak out about it, as long as we continue to be quiet, this is going to happen. And let me talk to my white folks out there. You need to check your people. You need to say something. You need to hold your people accountable. Because white supremacy is just not targeted to people like me anymore. It's coming right to your doorstep. You're being targeted now. It upset me to see the lack of response, compassion, media coverage on hashtag Buffalo. But yesterday, when the shootings happened with those babies and teachers, all I'm seeing on everyone's feed is hashtag Uvalde shootings. And that is what I'm talking about. As long as we continue to ignore how white supremacy impedes us all, this is going to continue to happen. It should not take babies getting shot for you all to speak up. It doesn't matter if the people look like me, are lighter than me, darker than me, older than me, younger than me, more experienced than me or not. You need to speak. And I am tired, especially, of white people remaining quiet, but only finding the time to speak on what is safe. Ukraine is safe, but not Black Lives Matter. Pakistan is safe, but not the terrorism that goes on in this country with Muslims. The straight attacks that Muslims see and get. It's okay to talk about the nightclubs, but not how the Asians are being attacked and terrorized. We find and cherry pick what's safe. And I'm sick and tired of seeing mayors, governors, politicians, many of you white people, even some of you people of color, not talk about the shootings that are happening in our marginalized communities, but being the first one to type on your social media about something that's safe. You are part of the problem because you fail to acknowledge racism and white supremacy. There have been more mass shootings in 2022 than the days in 2022. As of today, there have been 144 days. That means there are 221 days remaining in this year. Since 2018, there have been 4 mass shootings in Texas, or actually a little bit more than that. And it has cleared the way for the state to allow concealed firearms at churches, at colleges, and universities and K through 12 schools. But I don't see mass shootings getting any better with these laws being put in place. I don't see people walking out alive. Most of the time, I see the perpetrator walking out of alive. Let's keep it real. In 2021, just last year, people 21 and over could legally carry guns without license or training. How crazy does that sound? Your brain isn't even fully developed at 21, but you're legally able to carry a gun without a license or training. Do you know in Texas, for a teenager to be able to drive, they must undergo at least 6 months of driver's training before they can even apply for a license. And before that, they have to go under hours of training on driving and safe driving. They have to record all of their training. They have to get a certificate that shows that they've done this. It's not just, hey, here's your license. And even after that, it's a provisional license that they'll receive. Before they can even get their provisional license, they have to get a permit. And with their provisional license, it's no more than what, one or two people that can even ride with them in the car. But a 21-year-old can actually carry a concealed gun without a license or any training. What are we doing? Even long rifles can be openly carried in the public. Why would anyone need to carry a long rifle? There is absolutely nothing you can say to me to justify a person or civilian, especially, needing to carry a long rifle openly in the public. Yes, absolutely nothing. I have to get a hand clap for that. In Texas alone, there are no restrictions on gun sales, and lawmakers failed to actually pass universal background checks. This continues to happen over and over and over and over again. And I find this especially funny. I find this funny in the sense that we have a governor here, Governor Greg Abbott, who can call a special session to suppress the vote, but has not done anything related to gun laws. He's one of the governors who spearheaded this whole ban against abortion thing for women who are 6 weeks or longer in their pregnancy. And we're talking about protecting children, but we've had right now, what, 19, 20 children and counting dead? And the only thing you can do is give a speech, and you're still planning to participate in the NRA convention in Houston this weekend? Are we serious? You've got to be kidding me. Here's another interesting fact that I have found. That is in 2020, the year 2020, 45,000 Americans died at the hands of guns. 45,000 Americans. The gun death rate has actually increased by 15% from 2019, making it the highest level ever recorded. What are we doing in this country? What is going on? I know what's going on, and I'm going to tell y'all what's going on here in just a moment. Now, Abbott, he's not alone in visiting the NRA this coming weekend. He is going to be there with his buddies Trump, as well as uh, uh, Cancun Ted Cruz. I call him Cancun Ted Cruz because y'all know why. During our Texas winter storm, with all of the power and electric being cut off, he was bye-bye. He was headed to Cancun. And the only thing that brought him back to Texas is because he actually got caught. He even left the dog behind in the cold, in the dark. But he is finding a way to be there at the NRA. In America, we have more guns than the entire world. And that's not a misquote. That is not me misspeaking either. We have more guns than any other country in the entire world. 44% of all Americans report to own guns, or sorry, 41%, and 44% of households have guns. That's 81.4 million Americans. And that includes ages 18 and up. Now, that does not include those who have not reported having guns, but that's 81.4 million Americans reported to have guns. In this country alone, the United States of America, we have an estimated 400 million guns between the police, the military, and American civilians. That's more than the adults we have in this country. $400 million guns. And the average gun owner has at least, on average, at least 5 firearms. 5. Now, we're hearing a lot of things about 2020. And we know who we had in office in the year 2020. This is no coincidence. But during this time, 40 million guns were purchased. This was higher than any other year. 40 million guns alone. I don't know if you all remember, even last year, you couldn't find a gun to save your life to buy. And I'm not blaming the people who have guns at all. Because some of this gun ownership has really been sparked by fear. Some feeling like, I don't want to be caught without one. I feel like I need one. Because I don't want some crazed individual trying to kill me simply because the color of my skin or my religion, or because they're having a bad day. I need to be able to offer myself some type of protection. So firearms purchase actually jumped to 40% in the year 2020. Now, the percentage of gun owners who own a firearm types, 82% own handguns, 62% own rifles, and 55% own shotguns. And you're probably wanting to know, what are the demographics of those who own the guns? Where if we're just talking about from a race perspective, 47% of whites own guns. And the increase again happened in 2022. But I want to talk about black folks for a moment, because between black men and women, 58 there has been a 58.2% increase with blacks owning weapons, which again happened in the first 6 months of 2020. It goes back to that fear. I'm afraid. I am scared. 37% of black households own guns, while only 28% of blacks own guns. We're looking at right at about 35% of Hispanics who own guns, and right at about 20% of Asians who own guns. Now, you all heard me say at the beginning that the gun, guns, these mass shootings, I said it's connected right to white supremacy. And I'm going to break down how. See, when we talk about guns or gun control in this country, what often comes up is the Second Amendment. 2A is what I call it. And the Second Amendment, it's rooted in white supremacy. Let's talk about what the Second Amendment entails, and let me take you through a journey, a pathway, so you can better understand why I say this violence that we're experiencing is rooted in white supremacy, or the Second Amendment is rooted in white supremacy. Because I don't want you to think it's just opinion. Let me take the time to educate you or fill your cup just a little bit more. So let's first talk about what is the Second Amendment and what does it say? It says, 2A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Again, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Mm, mm, mm. See, that's deep for me, because for some of us, we might not be looking at what does this really mean, right? And I'm an unpacker. I can analyze things, deconstruct things, and unpack things to help me very clearly understand what's going on. And it's the same thing I've done to 2A. And let's talk about, what does 2A really mean? Because sometimes just because things are written doesn't mean you have a deep understanding of what it entails. The first thing it talks about is there being a collective right for both the militia and an individual right. And I'm going to talk to you about later about why those two things are separate yet the same. Because it's important history that's threaded into that meaning and that definition. See, the Second Amendment is a 2 century old amendment. And there have been arguments throughout history on what does it mean to bear arms or to keep. Bear arms mean. Is it the militia? Is it the individual? Is it both? There have been a lot of discussions and debates and arguments about this. So let me unpack for you what is militia, because to understand the amendment, you've got to understand what it says and how it was birthed and created. So some people actually think a militia is a military. It is not the military. Let me just clear that right now. As a matter of fact, it's insulting to me to compare the militia to the military. But the militia, they are considered in modern time basically an army made up of just regular citizens. Again, the militia has multiple definitions, and we're going to unpack why that is momentarily. Oftentimes, these people in the militia, they have some sort of military training. And once again, they are not the military. And people a part of militias, they would say they are defenders of rights. Now, back in time, it was said that bear arms means the collective military activity, not necessarily individual use. That's important. Okay, that is important. I want you all to keep that right here on your radar for those that can see me. If not, I'm pointing to my brain, my dome. Okay. So again, back in time, bear arms means a collective military activity, not individual use. That changed. And it had to change. It had to change for certain people to feel or to have the power to be able to initiate force, deadly force, to carry, to operate or have weapons. Now, the Second Amendment, it passed in 1789 and it was ratified in 1791. And again, what was put in place then is radically different than the modern US, what we are today, or at least what we should be. Because what we do know is back then in the 1700s, we had slaves, which is why the Second Amendment was put in place. We were less populated, and we did not have as many guns or the different types of guns that we have today. The Second Amendment is a part of the Bill of Rights. So let's talk about now how 2A is connected to white supremacy, how it's connected to racism in this country. Because some people just think, oh, it's my Second Amendment right, I can bear arms. But it's deeper than that. Now, I've talked to you about the militia and individual rights and how those rights became collective, yet they were separate. I've talked to you about how what was written centuries ago also did not consider modern times. And if it did consider modern times, then that means it's doing what it should be doing, which is protecting certain people, and it's inequitable. And it's used to harm another group or groups of people. I found a very interesting study from a beautiful, lovely, educated, highly intelligent, sophisticated Black woman by the name of Carol Anderson. She is an author and she is also the professor at Emory University. She has written a book, and I would definitely encourage you all to go buy it. She has written a book. It's called The Second Race and Guns and a Fatally Unequal America. Let me say that again. The Second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America. I mean, just brilliant title, by the way. Now, here is what her research and her studies have found and what her book talks about. It talks about what the militias were according to history back in the 1700s. See, the militias were put in place to control slaves. And see, now even in today's time, there's this perspective and laws put around the state governors having say on who should be able to decide when and if to ban guns, and they're saying only in high crime areas. And this power was given to states rather than the federal government for a certain reason. See, militias were there to help the slave patrol capture slaves and quote unquote put down slaves, according to the research of Carol Anderson. Because there became this huge fear of once the slaves are set free, or once they are allowed to be able to serve in the armies, in the military, in British and in the US, it was going to create this revolt against white Americans and this uprising. And so, to protect ourselves as white Americans, we need to make sure that we can have these militia groups put in place to bring them down, because we don't trust our own military. We don't have enough manpower. And we as a state, we need to protect our slave masters. Now, mind you, even though the Second Amendment was written in the 1700s, that 1789 time frame, the African Americans in the South, they didn't have any rights to firearms. Because remember what I said, it was not about blacks. Those who were enslaved did not have rights to firearms. What it was about was protecting white fear. What it was about was ensuring those who were enslaved did not do an uprising. And we have seen several examples of the Second Amendment not there to protect BIPOC people, specifically Black people. Because we know when African Americans legally carry guns, we have been harmed, shot, and killed. And we also know that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, has been very, very quiet when these things have happened. I want you to take, for example, did the Second Amendment protect Philando Castile? For those of you that have already forgotten, Philando Castile was killed by a police officer. Might have been 2018, somewhere around that time. But he was actually pulled over by a police officer. The police officer asked him to see his license or identification. And Philando Castile did what the NRA suggests. Tell your officer that you have the right to carry. And so he tells the officer this, and that he has a right to carry license. And within a split second, many of you have seen the video, the officer shoots and kills him. Not only is the officer free from any consequences or penalties, but the NRA remained quiet. I'll go a little bit further back. Take, for example, the Black Panther Party. When they demanded the arming of the black populace to protect themselves against anti-black violence, okay? It wasn't the Black Panther just saying, hey, we want to carry guns around just because we want to do it. That's not what happened. The Black Panther said, we want to arm ourselves to be able to protect ourselves against anti-black violence in the same way that white people have the right to arm and or bear arms to protect themselves. And this is when the revolution was going on in 1966 in California. But once again, the Second Amendment did not protect the Black Panther Party. Actually, in 1967, the California legislators responded to the Black Panther Party by actually putting in gun control statutes. And the gun control statute was discriminatory because it was meant to disarm and dismantle not only Black people, but the Black Panther Party. To even go back further than that, we'll go to a rebellion that happened in 1739 in Stono. It's called the Stono Slave Rebellion. And it was even heard that should any enslaved person escape, scalp them. And that they did not have rights or access to weapons. We're talking about Blacks who had to escape. Do you hear me? Escape from slavery. You have to escape from being abused, tortured, traumatized, providing free labor, being raped, victimized, and dehumanized in every single way. You have to escape. That's how bad racism has been ingrained in this society, to the point to where we're not going to make changes. You just have to escape from it. So militias were put together to stop, especially in the South, as a function to stop slavery revolts. Again, they were there to support the slave patrols. They were there to protect the slave owners because the states felt like the military was not going to help them. They would not be able to help them, especially being that not enough whites were going into the military at this time. In addition to that, you have the British saying to the Blacks, you have the United States saying to the Blacks, come on in. Come into the military, to the army. We need you to fight. And if you fight for us, what we will give you in exchange is your freedom. So you had the enslaved joining the military by the droves just to escape slavery, to be a freeman. You had Blacks leaving the United States. It was practically an exodus of blacks running over to British and signing up in the military just to be free. So once again, this now started to spark even more fear. Whites felt even more of a sense of, you know what? These enslaved people, they're going to have an uprising against us. They're going to rebel and have a revolt against us. And we're not fighting the British with effectiveness. So it is a personal crisis. We need your help. Somebody, please, please, please help us. So after that, the Second Amendment was crafted. It was actually crafted at the Constitutional Convention. And it was going to deal with who had the right to bear arms, what were the rights of the militia, particularly in the states. Why? Because at that time, the federal government had say over militia groups. So then we have these two men. Their names were Patrick Henry and George Mason. They led this concern where they said the militia being under the control of the federal government, it won't be here to protect us and to protect the slave owners in our states. So we, as states, we need to have the right to be over and control the militia, because we have to protect the slave owners. Because, I mean, what sense does it make for an enslaved person to actually want to be free? Why would people not want to get whipped and beaten, tortured and brutalized, and have their genitals cut off and be raped on a daily basis? Why would people get tired of being out in the hot sun or cold picking cotton? Having to lead the tobacco movement so we can fill our pockets and not be paid. It's crazy for people not to want to be taken away from their families and have their kids stripped from them and be given a slave name. Why would any person not want to be owned by a person anymore who's making them not speak their language and disconnecting them from their tribes? How dare they? How dare they not want to be chained anymore and fed scraps and hung from trees and lynched in broad daylight? How dare they not want to be called the N-word? How dare they? How dare they not want to be owned and branded anymore and refer to good old Jim as Master Jim? How dare they? We need protection, because you know what? If we don't get protection, guess what's gonna happen? They're gonna come after us. They're not gonna want to be slaves anymore. They're not going to want to work for us. You're laughing? Seriously, they're not. It's not funny. They're going to want to have their own families. And guess what? They're actually going to want to get paid and be treated as citizens in this country. Y'all think I'm kidding. I'm not playing. This is what Patrick Henry and George Mason basically said. And so from that, we have James Madison, who crafted the messaging to appease people like Patrick and George of their concerns and gave them full control, gave the states full control within that language, within that messaging and the Second Amendment over their militia. Thus, these militias then with force now had the power and the authority to put an end to slave rebellions according to what their states found acceptable. So, in essence, in case y'all haven't figured it out, let me get a drum roll. In essence, the Second Amendment basically gave the states control over the militias, which empowered them to quell these slave results. I don't know how to make it more simple than that to understand. But that wasn't good enough for those of y'all that thought I was done. That was not good enough. From there, there was a ratification that took place in between 1790, 1791. Nothing more like 1791. So since the states now had say over the militias now were seen as independent. So since we have this level of independence, now we need to think about, what does independence really mean? To be independent, you have to be what? Because if I am a part of a militia, and if I now have the power from my state, it is okay with my state for me to patrol those who are enslaved and use deadly force and carry weapons as though I am the military or anything else deemed acceptable to bring force upon those who are enslaved. How do we define my independence? Because I'm just really a citizen of this state who decided to join a group to put a stop to things that I don't like. So from there, the ratification said independence means citizens. If you are a citizen, you have your independence. So now citizen had to be defined because there are several people who live in the country. But hey, you know what? We said militia groups have the right to bear arms because the state says so. I'm independent. I'm considered a citizen, but there's a whole bunch of people here that could be considered a citizen. So then they would have the right to bear arms. They would have the right to galvanize and also consider themselves a militia. They would have a right to put a stop or put down things. We've got to do something about this. So now citizens became defined, and this was all a part of that Neutralization Act in 1791 on defining citizens, which basically boiled down to white skin equals citizens, And if your children are under 21, when they get their citizenship, they can be citizens. And I love how Carol Anderson unpacks and further expands that that did not include Black people. Black people were not citizens. Y'all remember the 3/5 rule, right? So this rule, this Second Amendment did not apply to Black people. We were not even considered citizens. And again, this whole thing developed and was created from putting a stop to those who were enslaved, who thought about escaping, and to keep them in check to remain slaves. That type of history, racist structural history, became more institutionalized even after revolution. There were more laws that determined the private possession of weapons for Blacks in the South as well as in the North. So these restrictions were put on Blacks to bear arms. Take, for example, in Georgia, there was a law that did not overturn prohibiting Blacks from carrying weapons. This came out of, or another example of that would also be from the Haitian Revolt. The Haitian Revolt sent fire waves across the United States. That because people were revolting and saying, no, I'm not, you're not coming to this country making us a slave. No, we're going to fight back against you. You have people like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington who expressed their concern, and oh no, this can't be. And once again, they perpetuated this white fear. So white fear became proliferated throughout the United States. And you can see a lot of these things that are happening, that happened then, happening now. The same exact moves, strategies, tricks, whatever you want to call them, dog whistling, messaging, whatever. You can see a lot of it in today's time. There were also situations where public armories were actually opened up for whites only, and justified whites being armed to put down these Black Haitians. Mm-mm-mm. You see, we've been having domestic terrorism in this country against our own people. This is nothing new. We've been having massive murders. This is nothing new. And some of you might be saying, well, Rashida, why are you saying mass shootings, it's domestic terrorism? Because it is. You see, I'm going to give you the definition from the FBI, and you tell me if mass shootings are not, if they're not domestic terrorism acts. Domestic terrorism is a violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences such as those of political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. You have lone offenders. You have these terrorists that are using the internet and social media to influence. And a lot of it is born from white supremacy. You're seeing that right now because you have several attitudes that believe at any moment, at any moment, you are not with the belief or ideologies of my political standing, of my religious standing, of my social standing or racial standing or environmental nature, I am going to commit a violent criminal act, either alone by myself or with a group to further my goal, messaging, and initiative of my belief or ideologies. You have people getting killed because they're black, people getting killed because they're Asians, people getting pissed off because they've had a bad damn day or because they want to be a copycat and send a message to others, do the same thing to further our political agenda or whatever it may be. So I'm going to go kill up some kids. I'm going to go to a church and assassinate all of these people. Hashtag Charleston, hashtag Santa Ana, California. So we can see how mass shootings are connected to domestic terrorism, and we won't name it and call it for what it is because oftentimes it's it's done by white people or influence from white supremacy. And you have fragility, white guilt. We lack acknowledging the deep impact of white supremacy in this country and how it impacts us all. So we won't call it for what it is. We won't do what we need to do to fix it. Instead, it's mass shootings. And oftentimes it's connected to, instead of white supremacy or racism, it's connected to mental illness. We're going to talk about how. Now, for those of you that may just be tuning in or that need a refresher, we've just finished discussing how the Second Amendment was actually created. There were militia groups, often the militia groups, or they were controlled by the federal government, and those militia groups were actually put together to put down quote unquote slave revolts, to stop slaves from escaping, to create white fear, to harm black bodies, to keep white slave owners in business, and to keep a power hierarchy and structure in this country. That's how militias were formed. They were there to help the slave patrol, who were police officers. That was their job, to protect white people's fear and to protect slave owners. So from that, the Second Amendment was developed because What typically happens is there are certain people in this country that create white fear, which was done by James or Patrick Henry and George Mason, who then received additional help from James Madison to create the language around the Second Amendment and bearing arms. The Second Amendment, for those of you that are joining in, it went so far that it had to be ratified in 1791 just to define who's considered a citizen, and it was not black. It wasn't black folks. So that now we can give permission to militia groups and also citizens. So now we can say it's there to protect states. So now you bearing arms cannot be infringed upon. You have the right. Now let's talk about how this racist amendment is connected to mental illness and why it's connected oftentimes to mental illness instead of what it really is: white supremacy, racism. So, whenever there is gun violence, the first thing we typically hear is a mental illness. I found an interesting study from Jonathan Metzl, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Kenneth MacLeish, and their research um, found four assumptions that are typically made when mass shootings happen. One, mental illness causes gun violence. Two, psychiatric diagnosis can prevent or predict gun crime. Shootings represent deranged acts of the mentally ill. And gun control won't prevent another mass shooting. Again, these are the four assumptions that Jonathan and Kenneth's research found. And what's also interesting is from 1989 to 2019, it was reported that only 28 mass shooters actually had a mental illness, a real diagnosis. As a matter of fact, Gary Brucato's research found that only 11% of all mass murderers and shooters, and only 8% of mass shooters, had a serious mental illness. His research also found that mass shooters in the US are more likely to have actual legal histories, use of recreational drugs, alcohol abuse, and they have a history of non-psychotic or neurological symptoms. Now, these four assumptions that Jonathan and Kenneth talked about also lead to blaming mental illness on gun violence rather than what it really is. It's culturally impacted. It's bred from racism. It's bred from a history of white people wanting to keep their security. It's bred from, we must keep this false narrative around whiteness. Also, this blaming then allows us not to address gun violence and how it's connected again. I'm going to keep saying it to white supremacy, racism, and capitalism in this country. It downplays the cultural issues that this country has. It goes back to racism and violence. It downplays the societal hierarchy in this country. It ignores America as a violent country. We are the only country in the world who has this problem at this level. It allows racist policies, such as the stand your ground laws, to actually be the discourse and disguised so that how systems of racism is impacting all of us is not being discussed. So that whiteness can be at the center and others can detach themselves from a lot of the things that we share because now they're focused on race. We all know that stand your ground is not for everybody. I gave you some examples earlier of how stand your ground laws have impacted Black people in a variety of ways. We know what would happen if BIPOC tries standing their ground. It allows whites to have and to keep their individualism. As when mass shootings happen, for them, it's just a mental illness. But when it's Black and brown folks, it's a communal aggression or a terrorist attack. It allows us to stay distracted from less than 3 to 5% of U.S. crimes involve people with mental illness, and the percentages of crimes that do involve guns are lower than the national average of a person not diagnosed with mental illness. In other words, it allows us or puts us in a place to not tackle and talk about really the root of the issue so that these things can continue going to perpetuate the root of the issue. And so, what must we do? We must call out racism and supremacy. We've got to stop ignoring it. We can't decide that it's okay to hashtag Ukraine, but not speak about the violence against Black bodies. We have to call our governors, our senators, and we've got to demand action. Let me see if I can pull up really uh, Governor Abbott's phone number and Ted Cruz so I can give it out. Let's see here. Okay. Contact the governor's office. Let's see. I have a few. Numbers here. Okay. So the first one is 800 5789. That's for Texas callers. This is to Governor Abbott, 800-843-5789. We also have for out of state callers at 512-463-1782. Again, that's 512-463-1782. And this is the office of the governor's main switchboard. You can reach that office at 512-463-2000. 512-463-2000. Think about calling Governor Abbott and expressing your concern over right now the leniency in gun laws, and demand that, just like he did with voter suppression, that he call a special session, and that he does something about the gun laws in this state, other than allow 18-year-olds to go purchase a gun and 21-year-olds to walk around, or older, to walk around with guns publicly without even a license. Let's look at good old running back Ted Cruz. Escape to Cancun Ted Cruz, or Cancun Ted Cruz. His contact information. Let's see. Okay. So we want to contact Ted. I find this amazing. I mean, it's difficult. You can't really find a phone number. He has a lot of emails. So hey, here's what I'm gonna do. Let me look at one more thing before I give out a number. Let's see here. Okay. This is the number that I have. And it may take you, some time and some a little bit of research if this number isn't going to point you to the right direction or lead you to Ted Cruz's office, but it is 512-916-5834. Again, that number is 512-916-5834. Just like with Abbott, contact him and Corey. Let them know that you demand action now. Another thing we must do is vote. I can't say it enough. These state and local elections, they matter and they have consequences. You got to get out there and vote, because there are people placed in positions who make major decisions for a minority group that impacts the majority. There are so many things that pertaining to the gun laws that actually many Republicans and Democrats and independents agree on, with there being stronger gun laws. But when you have certain people in place, those things may not get carried out. We can't just pray about it. If we keep praying about it, we're going to see this again and again. That can't just be the only answer. That cannot be the only answer. The NRA actually said we're going to continue to pray. This had nothing to do with the NRA. This actually had everything to do with a demented, sick, evil person. Now, they're right about that part, but also it has a lot to do with them as well. For those of you that are still not convinced, I want to read you some details on what happened in a couple of the domestic terrorist acts in the last couple of weeks. I'm going to start with the Buffalo shooter. This comes straight from CNN. It was an 18-year-old white man who's been accused of the killings of these 10 people due to racism. And I believe it happened at a Tops supermarket in Buffalo, New York. The sad thing is that he visited this area in early March quite a few times. He was basically doing a reconnaissance in the area. He went to the store on Friday and Saturday. And he lived about 200 miles away from the supermarket. He knew that the market was in a predominantly black neighborhood. He is not alone in doing something like this. As a matter of fact, white supremacist suspects, they were racially motivated, including places like El Paso, Texas. Of course, we talked about Charleston, South Carolina. We can keep going and going. The suspect, he had continued to write posts on Discord. And this is where he shared all of these hate-filled online forum on the online forum called 4chan, that he went into the store on noon, and then he went back again at 2 p.m., and then he went back again at 4 p.m. when he visited this store in March. At one point, he had even gotten a speeding ticket. He started to take notes that, or how many black people he counted or was there and how many white people was there. He also drew a map that depicted the store aisles, the pharmacy, the bakery, and exit points of the building, allegedly. Now, he wrote in his last reconnaissance visit that he was actually approached, and he said in quotes, by a black armed security guard. And the security guard said, "I've seen you go in and out. What are you doing?" And Patrick said he told the security guard that he was collecting consensus data. And then the security guard said to him, "Well, you need to talk to the manager." So then Patrick says back to him, he asked for the manager's name, or sorry, um, he asked for the security guard's name. I apologize. And then he instantly forgot the security guard's name. He said goodbye to the security guard. Thanks. He walked back to his car. And he was thinking all this time that was a close call. And not only that, he said, when I go back, and he wrote this on March 10th in a post. He said, when I go back, I'm going to have to kill that security guard at Tops. And I hope he doesn't kill me or even hurt me instantly, in quotes. He even mentioned that the attack would have taken place on March 15th, but he postponed the date several times. He thought about going to a church or even in an elementary school before settling on the supermarket. And again, this is the alleged or the suspect who has written this on his post. And then he had wrote a 180 page or he had written a 180 page diatribe that was posted online, and he laid out in detail his motives and plans for the attack. Ultimately, using his semi-automatic rifle to kill 10 people and wound 3 more, one who remains in the hospital. 11 of those victims were Black. Thus, the terrorist attack, is being investigated as a hate crime. I am going to read a little bit more information on um, the recent shooting that happened on May 24th, as of yesterday, 2022, at Uvalde ISD. I have some details that are very interesting. This man was actually 19, or sorry, 18. As we know, he has killed 19 children and 2 teachers. And before, he had allegedly texted a girl who lives in Germany about his intentions. Again, this is coming from CNN. Now, according to some of the screenshots, and the interview that they did with this girl in Germany who's 15 years old, she had been in communication with him for weeks. And this gentleman's name, you all know by now, is Salvador Ramos. He had complained about his grandmother being on the phone with AT&T on his phone. And he found it annoying. So then 6 minutes later, he texted that I just shot my grandma in her head. I want to quote that. And then seconds after that, he said in quotes, I'm going to go shoot up an elementary school right now. Now, he sent that to her at 6:21 p.m. There on Central European time, which was actually 11:21 here Central time in Texas. The girl, she lives in Frankfurt, and she started chatting with Salvador May 9th. And he would send selfie videos, and he would discuss his plan to go visit her in Europe, according to these text messages. They would play things like games on different gaming apps. And she is even quoted for saying, he looked happy and comfortable talking to me. Now, these were similar texts that Salvador also wrote on his Facebook, according to Greg Abbott. I mean, can you imagine how sick a person has to be to shoot their own grandmother and then shoot them in the head? That's evil. That is straight up evil. We need to call it what it is. All this mental illness stuff is putting a bad name and label on those who are really mentally ill, and it's having us stigmatize the wrong people. Again, this goes back to the impact of racism and white supremacy. Now, Salvador is alleged to drive to Robb Elementary School and then forces his way inside uh, an adjoining classroom, and then he opens fire at the group of kids and faculty. Let's stop right there. He pretty much barricaded the room so that no one could get in, and was intentional about making sure he killed these kids and these teachers. I just want y'all to sit with that for a moment because I don't want to normalize this. He barricaded himself in to adjoining classrooms and opened fire at those children and at those teachers. Mm, mm, mm. So the officers, they eventually force their way inside of this barricaded room and then they fatally shoot him, which we know now 21 are dead, 17 others are injured. And now this has become the deadliest school shooting in almost a decade. After following Buffalo and the shooting that also, or the domestic terrorist attack that also happened in Santa Ana, California at the church with the Taiwan church members. In case you're wondering, where is Uvalde ISD? It's about 90 miles west of San Antonio. It's just east of the US Mexico border. The alleged gunman is a local high school dropout, has no criminal history, and no known mental health history. He just turned 18 and legally bought two AR-15 style rifles and ammunition for his birthday. We have 5 10-year-olds and who have been publicly named as relatives among the dead. For one moment, I would like to take time to announce the names that we know of who have died from these incidents. Let me see if I can pull up Santa Ana. Shoot. Let's see if it'll come up. Let's see. Let's see here. If I can find it. Let's see. Mm-mm. Actually happened to in the Laguna Woods Church. Um they were the Taiwanese members were actually attacked during their lunch banquet, killing one person and wounding 5 others. What saved their lives is actually the congregants tackled this particular gunman and then they hogtied him with an extension cord and grabbed his 2 weapons. What was sad about it is he did what the man did with Charleston, the Dillon guy. He befriended these people to disarm them and to gain their trust, and then attacked. right in the Orange County suburb. It's a retirement community, and it's known as the Leisure World. And that was just a day after the Buffalo attack, which happened at about 1:26 p.m. Um, there in California. It was about 30 to 40 congregants. They were attending this lunch banquet. Um, and then what also just makes this really chilling is the gunman, he had actually sealed the doors to prevent them from escaping. Um, let's see if their names are listed. So sad. Mm, mm, mm. I don't see their names just yet. I want to acknowledge them, however, um, because they're human. I want to start with the Buffalo victims. I want to apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. I am terribly sorry to all the families who have recently lost family members from these acts of terrorism here in the United States. It brings me great grief, and I come with a heavy heart on just how impacted you all have been. I can only imagine. I can't imagine, but just thinking how I'm impacted and thinking about my kid, it saddens me. Just 2 years ago, my daughter, at her school, they were actually on lockdown due to a threat from, um, due to a school shooting threat. And I'll never forget while at work, the text message that I received from my daughter. It makes me emotional today. Actually brings me back where we were a couple of years ago. I remember at work, I was actually working with a few school leaders and we were evaluating their school culture. And out of nowhere, I get a text message from my daughter. Something just told me to look down at my phone. And usually I keep my phone in my hand because I am always checking the time when we're evaluating school culture as a way to collect quantitative data. But this particular time, I had not looked at my phone for a few minutes, quite some time. But I don't know, something just said, check your phone, because I remember we were actually walking in the hallway, myself and two other leaders, and we were talking just in general. And I happened to grab my phone and look down, and I remember my daughter's words saying, "Mom, we are on lockdown. This is your daughter." She was, believe contacting me from someone else's cell phone. "This is your daughter. We are on lockdown. There is a shooter in the building." And I just went crazy. And her text message said, "Please help me. Come and save me. Please help me. Come and save me." I will never forget that. "Please help me. Come and save me." She was and thinking it was going to be her last day of life. My daughter's last words would have, well, one of her last, a few of her last words would have been to me to come and help. And I remember how powerless I felt as I raced out of the school and was running to my car to hurry and get to her. And I was about 30, 40 miles away from her. And also my husband calling me at the same time in a panic saying, Raja's, they're in trouble. They're in trouble. Their school is reported to have a shooter inside. Where are you? Where are you? Get there. And me in a panic and crying, saying, I am on my way. Um, and I remember my husband racing to the school because he was also at work and I was racing to the school, so much so that we caught each other on the tollway here. And I could see us, both of us, I kind of sped past him and he was speeding past me. And we were moving quickly. A trip that usually would have taken um, almost an hour of drive time, we were moving so fast, took me about 40 minutes. And in addition to thinking about my child trying to get to her, I was thinking about, I know they're not going to let me into this school. What's going to happen to me when I try to break into this school to get my child? I was thinking about me flying down the highway and potentially getting pulled over by a police officer, and could I get killed just being a black woman, speeding down the highway trying to get to my daughter, who's reported there being a shooter in the building. So I had that on my mind, on top of I've got to get there to try to help my child while knowing there was only so much I could do. And then I remember her words were, her the final text was, "Mommy, I love you." And it was at that moment for me that I realized my daughter had realized that she was about to die. And I realized that she was very conscious that she was about to get murdered. She was about to get shot. It was at that moment I realized that a day that she had thought about just going to school to get an education, maybe hanging out with some friends, was going to end up in turmoil and death, simply because someone wants to prove a point. That shook me up. Now it was not, a shooter did not infiltrate the building. He was actually on his way to do it. He had gotten caught or made some threats, and some kids had shared this with police. It was alleged that he had a firearm on him, and then had taken off running throughout the neighborhood to hide from the police, later on resulting in them capturing him. But still, if my mental state was there and my daughter walked out alive, I can only imagine the mental state of these families who continue to encounter such atrocities. We've got to do something about these gun laws. And part of that is naming a thing a thing. What we're dealing with is racism. What we're dealing with is the protection of white supremacy, and it's manifesting in several ways. It's becoming cultural. It is cultural. It's become a cultural norm. It's influencing others to take on the same perspectives, ideologies, and beliefs to send a message, because we continue to play with what it really is. And until we demand for better and call it what it is and start putting parameters and laws and policy in place to dismantle this level of racism, we are going to continuously have 300, 400, 500 shootings happening every single year. So now I want to acknowledge the victims who have been impacted in the recent days of these domestic terrorist attacks, to pay my respect, to also humanize these people as husbands, wives, children, people who had a future, people who were thinking about being the next something, people who were in love or looking forward to marriage, families that were looking forward to their children coming home, hugging them, kissing them, families who had gone to their kids' graduation and award ceremony only to be told that your baby isn't coming home today. I want to acknowledge them. I want to start with Buffalo. Again, I apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. We have Roberta Drury, 32, Margus Morrison, 52, Andre McNeil, 53, Aaron Salter, 55, Geraldine Talley, 62, Celestine Cheney, 65, Hayward Patterson, 67, Catherine Macy, 72, Pearl Young, 77, Ruth Whitfield, 86, Zyree Goodman, 20. This person was treated and released from the hospital. Jennifer Warrington, 50, who was treated and released from the hospital. Christopher Braden, 55, has had non-life threatening injuries. To the people in Uvalde ISD, Robb Elementary School, Xavier Lopez, 10. Just hours before he was killed, he was lauded at Robb Elementary's honor roll ceremony. Uzziah Garcia, 10. He was a fourth grader, known to be full of life and love video games. Jose Flores Jr., 10. He was a fourth grader and he was described as an amazing kid and big brother to his two siblings. He also loved baseball and video games. Lexi Rubio, she had just she had just been awarded before she was taken. 10 years old, fourth grade. She made the All A honor roll and received the Good Citizens Award. Right now, those are all of the names that have come out right now of the children. As it relates to the adults, we have Irma Garcia. She was a teacher there at Robb Elementary. She was a wife and a mother to four children, known to be sweet, kind, and loving, fun with the greatest personality, a wonderful, wonderful fourth grade teacher. She sacrificed herself trying to protect the kids in her classroom. The family has started a GoFundMe campaign. Amiri Joe Garza, . Um, I'm sorry, she was also one of the children um, who was killed. She was 10 years old. Actually, I recant that. She was not killed. She was found. She was spent. Her father, Angel, has spent several hours looking for her, and he just wants to let everyone know. Thank you for your prayers and help trying to find her. Hug your children and tell them that you love them. Actually, I apologize. She did die. She was trying to protect her classmates, actually. So I apologize. She did pass away. We have Eva Marilis. She was a fourth grade teacher. She had been an educator for 17 years. Her son had autism or has autism. It was reported that some of the people said she made you feel like she was only teaching your child. These are all the names that have been reported thus far. Again, I want to offer you all my condolences, the families. I want to say, get out here and do something. Our lives truly depend on it. We have to name a thing a thing. I'm sad to say that I know this won't be my last time. I'm even sadder to say that I could potentially be next. Just how dangerous and violent this country has become. So can you. So can your loved ones. So I ask that you do something about it. That's been my time. I am your host and founder of Black Women in Educational Leadership, Rashida Hobbs Jones. I do appreciate you tuning in to today's show. Again, I wanted to thread how exactly racism, white supremacy is rooted in several different contexts and formats. And if you are okay with situations of Black women being oppressed and discriminated against, Black people, Asian people, Hispanic people, people of color, marginalized groups, Indian people, you are fine with domestic terrorists. You are saying you are fine with the other levels of oppression and racism and discrimination acts that happens against people and groups in this country, because what impacts one of us, in the words of MLK, impacts all of us. For I cannot be better or see the best of you if I am not there. So I want to remind us of that. Again, I appreciate you tuning in. You can follow us at Black Women in Education or Ed Leadership. Let me say that again. You can follow us at Black Women in Ed Leadership on Instagram, Black Women Ed Leadership on Facebook. You can also find us under Black Women in Educational Leadership or Ed Leadership under YouTube. You can find us on Twitter under Black Women in Ed Leadership. We are also on podcast forums where you can tune in and listen to topics that impact Black women in leadership, as well as other topics that we discuss, also leadership tips that we give for those who are in higher ed or educational leadership that you might not be being told simply because you are considered an outlier, or you might be outcast or feel isolated. And so we give you tips so you can be better at your job and do what it is that you need to do to be your best self and go to the next level. Also, we provide digital content on so many things related to our issues. And I'm so excited to be able to have a platform such as this to talk to you all about these things that are often ignored and not discussed. And finally, we have something for Black women in education to refer to listen to. And of course, if you're not Black, thank you for tuning in. You can always learn from these discussions and topics. I appreciate you all today. Please follow, share, like. You can also comment. We definitely would like your support. Also, I'm a book author. You can check out my books on Amazon just by searching Rashida Hobbs Jones. You will find three children's books that we have. We would love to have those in your libraries. And get ready, pretty soon I'm going to be selling journals and poetry that I'm going to be writing on my Linktree website. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you for your time. We will see you next time. Get ready. We're going to be talking about those things such as hiring, setting clear expectations, again, so that you can be successful in your work, and other forms of oppression so you can be educated on what you're dealing with. We'll see you next time.